Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to completely validate your apathy toward the world's biggest sporting events. We're looking right at that invisible psychological architecture hiding beneath all the face-painting superfans. So if you've ever felt completely alienated while literally everyone around you loses their minds over a sports tournament, well, you are in the exact right place. We are breaking down the hard science of exactly why you just don't care, and why, honestly, that is absolutely fine.
Okay, so let's really dive into this. Picture it. The rest of the world grinds to an absolute halt. Grown adults are openly crying in public over a football tournament without an ounce of apology. And you're just sitting on the sofa feeling completely unbothered, right? You might even be, kind of annoyed that your whole social media feed is suddenly just a sea of team jerseys. And yeah, people might look at you with genuine concern, like your total disinterest is some weird medical symptom they need to investigate. But as we'll see, the psychology points in a completely different direction.
Because think about it. If we strip away all the massive cultural hype, we really have to acknowledge the completely absurdist reality of what millions of fans are actually doing here. We're talking about billions of people caring so intensely about an event where they have absolutely zero control over the outcome. None. They get emotionally wrecked over strangers they've never even met, who are just kicking a ball around on a pitch in a faraway country they've probably never even visited. And yet, somehow, they internalize the outcome as this huge personal victory or a totally devastating defeat. When you look at it literally, the whole shebang is actually a bit strange, isn't it? Let's move on to part one, basking in reflected glory. So, back in 1976, this researcher named Robert Cialdini noticed something super fascinating about university students. He saw that they were significantly more likely to wear their school's branded apparel the morning after their football team won compared to when they lost. Now, keep in mind, these students didn't play the game, they didn't coach it, and honestly, half of them probably didn't even watch it. Yet they treated their mere proximity to the win as literal ownership of it. Cialdini called this documented phenomenon basking in reflected glory, or burging. It perfectly shows how desperately we humans use group membership to manage and, sort of artificially boost our own self-esteem. And man, this brilliantly illustrates the sheer opportunism of the human ego. Just look at the extreme contrast in fan language. Have you ever noticed this? When a team succeeds, the pronoun is instantly super inclusive. We won, we did it. But the absolute second that team loses, suddenly the language abruptly shifts outward. Oh, they played terribly today. See what happened there? The ego just quietly sidesteps the wreckage of a loss to completely protect its social identity. It's not people being cynical, it's literally just how our social identity functions to protect our sense of self. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. If you sat through that final match and felt genuinely nothing, it definitely doesn't mean you lack human empathy. What sports fandom is really providing on a deeper level is a kind of scaffolding for the tribal instinct, that fundamental built-in human need to just belong to something. As a non-fan, you aren't missing this desire for belonging. You've just built your psychological scaffolding in a place where you feel genuinely known. That could be a specific subculture, a creative community, maybe a really intense career passion, or just a tight-knit friend group, rather than, performing fake enthusiasm for a team you only picked because your dad liked them. All right, let's get into part two, your brain on sports. Now, for a hardcore fan, watching a match kicks off this incredibly powerful cycle of behavioral compulsion. It all starts with step one, a prior attachment to the team. That attachment leads directly into intense anticipation. And because the outcome is entirely uncertain, it creates this huge, sustained state of tension. The wild thing here is that the brain's reward circuitry doesn't just fire when a goal is actually scored. It fires continuously during that whole anxious waiting period, just anticipating whether something good will happen. Structurally speaking, sports are basically exploiting the exact same behavioral compulsion that makes slot machines so incredibly difficult to walk away from. In psychology, we call this intermittent reinforcement. A fan doesn't know what the next play will bring, exactly like you don't know what the next spin of a slot machine will pay out. That massive gap between expectation and outcome, the near miss, the crazy stoppage time goal, it is a massive chemical hook. It effectively turns the entire stadium into a giant pulsating casino for the human brain. But here's the catch. For the non-fan, this chemical hook fails entirely. And why is that? Well, because the hook strictly requires that very first step from our cycle, prior attachment. If you don't have an identification with one of the teams, you have absolutely zero emotional stake. And without a stake, the uncertainty of the match doesn't feel compelling in the slightest. It just feels like sitting in a room watching totally random strangers flip a coin for an hour and a half. So it's not emotional flatness on your part, you are literally just missing the required neurological trigger.
Which brings us to part 3, the national identity problem.
So every 4 years, there's this immense, almost suffocating cultural pressure where even people who never, ever follow club football are expected to just suddenly care. Why? Simply because it's nations competing. It's your flag. It's your collective identity made physical by 11 players on a pitch. But for a lot of people, this specific framing actually makes the whole thing weirder. I mean, you didn't choose where you were born. You might have decades of incredibly messy, complicated feelings about your country. So when you're suddenly expected to feel personally victorious because a stranger from that exact same country kicked a ball into a net, the emotional arithmetic just doesn't land. A simple flag on a jersey just can't hold all that real-world complexity.
Moving on to part 4, a very modern phenomenon. Okay, prepare for a pretty fascinating historical plot twist here. People love, and I mean love, to describe sports fandom as this ancient, hardwired human instinct. But while basic tribalism is definitely real, the intense emotional attachment to strangers performing athletically on a glowing screen, that is extraordinarily new. For practically all of early human history, you literally couldn't even conceive of following a team this way. It wasn't until the 1950s that researchers like Horton and Wool actually noted that television was creating entirely new categories of one-sided parasocial emotional relationships between audiences and strangers on screens. So today's version of fandom, the global broadcast rights, the face paint, the literal personal grief over screen broadcasts, that is entirely a product of mid-20th century mass media and color television. So the absolute kicker here is this. Sitting unaffected by a televised sports broadcast doesn't mean you're somehow broken or missing out on a universal human experience. In fact, if you really look at it objectively, the person sitting completely unbothered in their kitchen through a World Cup final might actually be much closer to humanity's default evolutionary programming. This intense, remote parasocial fandom we see today, it's only existed for a total blink of an eye in human history. Now look, to be entirely fair to the mega fans out there, the research absolutely does back them up when the fandom is genuine. Highly identified supporters do show real psychological gains, stuff like real boosts in self-esteem, lower loneliness, and a powerful sense of shared meaning that acts as a vital social lifeline. But, and this is a massive but, there is a world of difference between an identity that naturally fits you and an identity you just borrow because the room expects you to. If you're out there faking it, performing this grief or joy you don't actually feel just because opting out feels way too socially costly, you aren't going to magically get those psychological benefits. You're just going to end up completely socially exhausted. Ultimately, the psychology of not caring about these massive sporting events really boils down to this. Certain collective experiences land perfectly for some people, and they simply do not for others. And you really cannot manufacture that landing. Your apathy toward this specific tournament isn't a symptom of some dark indifference to everything in life. It's actually a highly specific signal that your human attachment system has already found somewhere else to be. Like the quote says, your brain isn't wired wrong, it's just actively engaged elsewhere. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to consider a completely different perspective on your own interests. Think about it. If you aren't lighting up for a globally televised football tournament, what is the community, the specific subculture, or the passion that truly captures your inherent drive to belong? Because finding that exact place where you genuinely light up, well, that is exactly what all this sports fandom was trying to achieve in the first place.